Rick McFadden is a native of south suburb of Chicago. He enlisted in the Marine Reserves and went to Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego in August of 1986. Then to Infantry Training School for Military Occupational Specialty of 0351, Anti-Tank Assaultman. Shortly after being promoted to sergeant, he graduated from Western Illinois University and accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in September of 1990. Upon finishing basic school, he went to Artillery Officer School in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, after which he was assigned to 2nd Battalion, 11th Marine Regiment, and then to the 5th Battalion, 11th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, where he served as a forward observer, platoon commander, and an artillery liaison officer. The highlight of his active duty was being the artillery liaison officer to Battalion Landing Team 1-1 with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. Upon separation from the Marine Corps, he was a captain. After separating from the Marine Corps in September of 1994, he married Cindy, and they headed to the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana to obtain a Master's of Business Administration degree. He's worked in sales and operation roles for 20 years before leaving the corporate world to start a handyman company in 2018. Please welcome Rick, and we're very happy that you're here.
Semper Fi.
Semper Fi.
It's good for the spirit to be with Marines, isn't it? An added bonus to coming up here is age is relative, and you guys make me feel young. What's that, Denny? Thought I'd open up with a funny story. So, in addition to being the artillery liaison officer to 1-1, I was the acting XO for Weapons Company, and we flew from Okinawa up to Mount Fuji. We were doing some training up there. So on this day, my task was, my driver and I were to go meet the battalion commander and chaplain at the airport and get him up to the training area. And it was cold and snowy, miserable. So we pull up to the training area, we stop, and doors of the Humvee all open up, and as I'm getting out, I hear one Marine say to another, "I told you we were going to freeze to death. They sent the chaplain." So World War I. We don't know much about the Great War. I remember in high school, I was told that World War I happened because the Archduke of Austria-Hungary was assassinated. And that never made sense to me. How does the whole world go to war over the heir to the throne? He wasn't even the king. So I'm going to unpack this, and then we'll talk about preparation to go to the Great War, and then we'll focus on what the Marines actually did in World War I. And we're going to do that for two reasons. Because as Marines, we can't see past ourselves, right? And then the second reason is 99% of history and books and movies on the Great War involve the Army. And justifiably so, but today we're going to focus on the Marine Corps. So what led up to World War I? There was great tension in the early 1900s. So the countries were forming alliances, and you almost need a whiteboard to keep track of it. So Russia was aligned with Serbia, Germany was aligned with Austria-Hungary, France was aligned with Russia, Britain and France and Belgium were aligned, and Japan and Britain were aligned. So when the Archduke gets assassinated, and what happened was, it was in June of 14, a Serbian national group, which hated Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary occupied them. The terrorist group was called the Black Hand. So that morning, in June 1914, they threw a grenade in the Archduke's vehicle, and they were able to get the grenade out, didn't kill him. He went to his event, And then leaving the event that day, the Archduke and his wife were killed. So that leads us to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. And then it was game on. So the way it rolls out, I mean, if you made a movie about this, it wouldn't be believable. So we have our event, the assassination in June of 14. So on July 28th, the next month, Austria declares war on Serbia. As Austria's ally, Germany declares war on Russia. Germany then declares war on France in August, an ally of Russia, and immediately begins the invasion of Belgium. On August 4th, Great Britain, an ally of France, declares war against Germany. So there was all this tension, there's the assassination, and then everyone just started getting on sides. Late in 1914, Germany kind of tricks Russia into getting involved, attacking the Ottoman Empire, what we call today Turkey. And how they did that was 25% of Russian goods went through the Ottoman Channel. And so Germany gave some boats to the Ottoman Empire, some naval ships, and they fired on Russia. So then Russia was attacking the Ottoman Empire. It was a hot mess. The root causes, so we just talked about all the mutual defense alliances, but there was also imperialism. In this time in history, countries like the British Empire, the French Empire, they would take over other countries. That was the in thing back then. And then there was the arms race. You know, in our lifetimes, the arms race has been nukes. But back then it was navies and armament. And it was a way to conquer other peoples and also protect oneself. And then certainly nationalism was a big deal. Serbia didn't want to be part of Austria-Hungary. So there was two sides. They fell under the Allies or the Central Powers. The Central Powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, modern-day Turkey, and Bulgaria. On the Allies, it was the British Empire. It was the entire empire. In fact, Australia had a very large percentage of casualties in World War I. So the British Empire, France, Russia, US, Italy, Belgium, Japan, and others. In total, there was over 30 countries that got involved with World War I. And here you can see the Allied powers are in green, Central powers are in yellow, and then the neutral powers are that purple. When the war broke out, Wilson, our president, was very clear that the U.S. was going to be neutral. So that's 1914. So now we're going to fast forward to 1917. Both the eastern, that's the Russian side, and the western front, which is like the France-Germany boundary border, both sides are bogged down in trench warfare, right? We've seen the movies, all quiet on the western front and so on. Humanity has found ingenious ways to kill one another that had never existed. Machine guns, huge artillery, like railroad-mounted artillery, and then chemical weapons, gas. So we got super efficient at killing one another, and our tactics didn't quite line up with that yet. So you can imagine the world at war, Russia being a big, wealthy, large population country. They were a big part of the Allies. They had the Russian Revolution in February, and by March they enter a treaty with Germany, so they're out. The big player of the Allies is out. And the Russian Revolution is what was Lenin, right? Led to what we would know as the Soviet Union. So they're out in March of 17. The Allies are exhausted. They've lost so many men. We're going to talk a lot about casualties. The casualties are just staggering. So let's go across the pond. Woodrow Wilson. He's our president from 1913 to 1921. He was a college president, right? He had a PhD in history and political science. He ran on, was passionate about, and just pushed a domestic policy. That's what he wanted to do. In fact, he's quoted as saying, "It would be ironic if I got involved with foreign affairs." Little did he know there was just going to be a little world war. He actually campaigned on World War I neutrality. Oh, you know, one of the things I skipped on the last slide, one of the interesting things about Wilson is he was widowed and remarried while in office as president. I don't think we've ever seen that before. So why does the U.S. get involved? So Wilson campaigned for re-election on U.S. neutrality, but then some things happened. So the media made a big deal out of atrocities happening in Belgium. Because A, it was true, and B, it sells newspapers, right? It gets people juiced up. J.P. Morgan sold $3 billion in loans to the Allies, and he wanted to protect his investments. So you have the kind of media and big business maybe kind of pushing for war, encouraging the war. Nothing like we see with Ukraine today, right? There's not big money and big media pushing the good guys, bad guys narrative with Ukraine. I'm not taking a side on it. It's just funny how history repeats itself, right? It's kind of like I've seen this movie before. Next, the Lusitania, we've all heard of that, was sunk. It was carrying 1,000 passengers, sunk in 1915, killed 128 Americans, so that was big news. But then the straw that broke the camel's back is British intelligence intercepted a telegram from Germany to Mexico saying, if you start war with the United States, we'll give you the territories you lost in the Mexican-American War. And at that point, it was game on. In April, Wilson says, he approaches Congress and says, we need to go to war. Within like 4 days, the Senate and the House had ratified that. So the U.S. declares war April of 17. So the U.S. Army, you know, let me start with the end. We'll finish the war less than 2 years, because the armistice is November 11th of 18. We'll finish with a 4 million man military. So with that in mind, in a year and a half or whatever, we're going to have 4 million. In April of 17, the Army had 128,000 active, Navy had 73,000 sailors, Marine Corps 14,000. But in Russia, to put this into perspective, the French, British, Russian, and German armies all had battles that there were over 10,000 killed in the battle. So we had a long ways to go. And this is an example of some of these battles. You can see it for yourself, but August 22nd of 14, France in the Battle of the Frontiers had 27,000 men killed in one day. So World War I was just brutal. And there we were with whatever the numbers added up to, 200,000 man military. So recruiting was a big deal. Any Marine recruiters? Any former recruiters? Sergeant Major? So the Marine Corps at this point, in 1917, had never fought in big numbers, right? We were involved in the Spanish-American War. We did some stuff with the Philippine insurrection. We had the Boxer Rebellion in China. These were all small unit, generally the detachments coming off the ships, right? So we had an identity crisis as America. What do we do with the United States Marine Corps in a world war? And we'll talk about where we go with that. But so there was a major recruiting effort, and the recruiters came up with we would call it a marketing tagline in business, but they came up with the tagline, "First to fight," and we've all seen these posters around, right? This came out in 17. We stand up Marine aviation. Pre-war, we had 5 officers and 18 enlisted experimenting with aircraft in the Marine Corps. They were located in Philadelphia, Pensacola. So Marine aviation has always been in Pensacola. In San Diego, we all learned in boot camp. What do we call those books of knowledge that we carry in our cargo pockets?
Green monsters.
Green monsters. We all learned that Lieutenant Cunningham was the father of marine aviation. And here we see one of the planes, and I think this was one of CR's training planes, wasn't it?
One of the later ones.
So Cunningham enlisted in the Army and went to the Spanish-American War, fought that and got out. He got out for 10 years and sold real estate. He had a hobby of flying. He ends up joining the Marine Corps after being out for 10 years. He gets orders to the Experimental Air Wing, and he would become the squadron commander. He would be joined by Lieutenant Geiger. We'll know Geiger of World War II fame. He was a famous general in World War II. During the Battle of Okinawa, the Army general is killed towards the end. I think his name was Buckner. There's a Buckner Bay in Okinawa. Geiger would take over. But Geiger, another unusual route to the Marine Corps, he was a successful lawyer and joined the Marine Corps at age 32 in the early 19-teens. When we go to Europe, when the Marines are sent to Europe, their planes don't go because they didn't fit, right? There was no way to get over there, and Marine aviation was used for long-range bombing runs. Women Marines. So, as usual, we are honored to have the past president of the National Women's Marine Association, Paula, with us. The Women Marines were stood up August 13th, 1918. Opha May Johnson was the first woman Marine. We'll have 300 in World War I, and they're used for stateside clerical duties. To put that into perspective, today there's over 20,000 and they make up almost 10% of the Marine Corps. Quantico. Quantico exists because of World War I. The Marines initially leased the land. It was a major training base. And initially, when it opened, it had 4 officers and 91 enlisted to kind of coordinate things. It would train thousands of Marines in World War I. And the first units were my alma mater, if that's what you call it, 11th Marines and 13th Marines. For us gun nuts in the group, these are the weapons of World War I. And you'll notice it's bolt action. And then we have all of our beloved 1911s there, the 45. Machine guns. Machine guns are big in the World War. The U.S. lagged. We don't say this very often in history. The U.S. lagged in both number and technology of World War of machine guns. So much so that the Brits and French lent us theirs. We brought some of ours, but we used theirs. Then there's General Blackjack Pershing. We learned this in high school history. He would be the commander of the American Expeditionary Forces. Obviously, he was an Army general. He was a Missouri farm kid. He fought in the Indian Wars. He got the nickname as Blackjack because he led a black cavalry unit. In 1915, so just 2 years before the war, his wife and kids lived at the Presidio in San Francisco, and their quarters burned, and his wife and 3 daughters were killed. Just what a terrible, terrible tragedy. And then to bear the responsibility just 2 years later, it's hard for me to get my mind around that. Pre-war, just before the war, he was in the southern United States chasing Pancho Villa. He's probably sleeping under the stars, had no idea in 12, 18 months he'd be leading the Allied powers across Europe. One of the interesting things about this picture, notice his ribbons, right? Our generals today, tons of ribbons. Ribbons weren't as popular back then. Some things about Pershing is he had this faith in American exceptionalism. He felt that just with our marksmanship, nobody could stand up to us. He believed that till the end. He felt that the Europeans were tired and dispirited, and that the fresh Americans, he called them the strapping and vigorous American doughboys, were just going to tear it up. He blamed the over-reliance of artillery for the stagnation of the trench warfare. He discounted, history is not on his side, but at the time he discounted the concept of combined arms. He was really into the bayonet, just that he felt, I'll find the words, that he advocated for self-reliant infantry. And we'll see that with our casualties. He was all about just marksmanship and bayonets, and go for it. So the Marines head to Europe. Pershing opposed the Marines being involved. He was very pragmatic, and it was like having a different, like if you have tools to work on American cars, you don't want to work on Volvo, right? Because it's a different tool set and so on. He just felt like it would be too complicated to have a different unit. So the Commandant, in good Marine Corps fashion, went around him and went right to the Secretary of War and sold the Secretary of War and the Marines going there. So the 5th Marine Regiment would arrive in France in June of 17, and the 6th Marines would arrive in February. The 6th Marines and the 6th Machine Gun Battalion. Do we have any 5th or 6th Marines here? A couple? Right on. Yeah, when I was in 211, we supported 3-5. So they were named, 5th Marines and 6th Marines were put into the 4th Marine Brigade and attached to the 2nd Army Division. We get to France, and we are trained by the French and the British. They wanted to train us in trench warfare. And of course, Pershing was not about that. But nevertheless, we were trained by the British and the French. We as Marines were used, because remember, Pershing didn't want us there. We were used as logisticians and rear security for a year. So, we all talk about our recruiters, right? We all have our recruiter stories. First to fight, the posters and so on. And we get there, we pull rear security for a year. Pershing relieved the Marine Brigade commander and put his chief of staff in place to kind of watch the Marines, keep them between the guardrails. And that man's name was Brigadier General James Harvard. And most of history, instead of calling them the 4th Brigade, they're known as the Marine Brigade, the Marine Brigade. I can get my lips to work. So in the spring and early summer of 1918, the brigade finally gets a mission, and they start moving to the east as part of the 2nd Army Division towards Verdun. But we know that in February, March of this year, the Russians form a treaty with Germany, and they're out. So now the Germans have come across Germany from the Eastern Front to the Western Front, and they're going to make another break at France. So as the brigade moves towards Verdun, The Germans launched their third offensive, headed to Paris, and the 2nd Army Division, to include the Marine Brigade, starts going back to the rear. And as at this point, the Germans have all the offensive and the momentum. They are just tearing it up. So in late May, as we said, the hole is punched in the Allies' lines. 1 million people in Paris flee the city. They leave Paris because of this German threat. And then, has anybody ever heard of Belleau Wood? So the offensive happens in May. June 1st, the line that the Marines occupy happens to be a hunting preserve 39 miles from Paris. They're under, this area is under the command of a French commander. So they're responsible for this hunting preserve, and it's a big deal. We all say Belleau Wood, right? We've all heard it. It was an exceptional battle, something that we can be proud of. So the Marines, with no artillery, insufficient number of machine guns, and under constant chemical attack, begin this battle against the Germans. And the Germans were exceptional at interlocking machine gun fire. So one machine gun bunker could cover another. So just like in World War II, when we would attack, and we're going to do the same thing in World War I, as we attacked machine gun bunkers, the other bunkers always had cover. So the Germans were in place. They were experienced, but and I'm going to share some books at the end if you're interested. As I read about the Battle of Belleau Wood, what I'm envisioning is these Marines were so upset to be on rear security for a year, right? They get recruited, they get marketed to, they go, and then they're like logisticians for a year. By the time they get to Belleau Wood, they are pissed. And just keep that in mind as I tell you the story. So early in the battle, the general commanding the 4th Brigade orders the Marines to hold where they stand. They're taking heavy casualties. The French retreat. And as the French are leaving, they're like, come on, Marines, we got to get out of here. And again, from boot camp, we all know this. This is credited to Captain Lloyd W. Williams of 2-5. He says, retreat hell, we just got here. Again, these guys are mad that they've been on the rear duty for a year. And I'm just going to do highlights. This is 26 days of constant carnage, constant battle. 03:10 hours, June 4th, a company commander sends back to his 2-5 commander. I find this hilarious. I don't know if you guys. He says, the French major gave Captain Corbin written orders to fall back. I have countermanded the order. Kindly see that the French do not shorten their artillery range. He's like, we're still going forward. Don't pull back your artillery range. June 6th. So the Marines are tasked with attacking Hill 142, but only 2 companies were in position, but they still went. The Marines advanced in waves of bayonets through the wheat fields, and they were just mowed down. It's just a horrible thing to read and to hear. Whole platoons were cut down. But by afternoon, the hill was taken. As part of a second phase of the Allied offensive, other parts of the brigade attacked into the forest. First waves were absolutely slaughtered. The Marines swept into the southern end of Belleau Wood and encountered heavy machine gun fire, sharpshooters, and barbed wire. By the end of the day, on June 6th, there was 1,087 dead or wounded Marines. This is a map. Up is north. You just kind of see where 5th and 6th Marines were positioned early in the battle. Then on June 6th, the Marine Corps propaganda machine came to life, and it lives today. There was a man that's given a great deal of credit for this, Floyd Gibbons of the Chicago Tribune. He had very colorful prose. He wrote things like, and he's writing of the Marines, a veritable hell of hissing bullets, a death-dealing torrent against which the Marines bent their heads as though facing a March gale. He wrote these kinds of stories about the Marines. And again, kind of in the unique Marine Corps way, we kind of stick it to the Army a little bit. Pershing told the media, do not give any unit designations. All you say is the branch, Army, not thinking that he's got a little bitty brigade. At the end of the war, we'll talk about, there's 39,000 Marines total in the 4 million, right? So at this point, he's not even thinking about the Marines. So Floyd Gibbons was like, yes, sir. And in all of his newspaper articles, he kept talking about the Marines. So the Marines were getting more than their fair share of the media coverage, but it was only because they couldn't give unit designations in the media for the Army. So as we all know, we've all heard in boot camp, First Sergeant Dan Daly famously said, come on you sons of bitches, do you want to live forever? So Dan Daly was actually, he was credited in the newspaper as a gunny, but he was actually a first sergeant. He was with the 73rd Machine Gun Company. Back then, it was before like Alpha Bravo Charlie like we use today. The companies were numbered. And Daly would later tell a Marine historian, what I really said was, for Christ's sake, come on, do you want to live forever? So it's kind of funny how our history can kind of be a little bit off. June 8th, fighting continues. We have another 400 casualties. June 9th, finally, the artillery is brought, the Allied artillery is brought into the battle. And we do this huge barrage to soften the enemy, which is great. But what it did for the grunts is we knocked down a bunch of trees. So not only did they have to battle through the woods, but now they have branches and trees all laying down. So it made the job even more difficult. The Germans counterfired and reorganized their defenses. One Marine, a commander of 2-6, his name was Holcomb, he would write home and he would say, I am safe and well. I have not even had my shoes off for 10 days, except once for 10 minutes. Several days I've been without food, and my only sleep have been snatched at odd moments during the retorted. The whole brigade put up most wonderful fight. We have been cited twice by the French authorities. So you can see how rough they had it. And this Holcomb would become commandant from 1944 to 1948. On the 10th, 1-6 and the machine gun battalion attacked north into the woods. Although this attack seemed to be succeeding at first, it was our attack was stopped by the machine gun fire. 2-5 was ordered to attack the woods from the west, and the Germans used great quantities of gas. A letter on a dead German soldier said that the Marines fought like savages. And you know, Marine Corps lore says they call this Teufel Hundens, and which is German for devil dog. June 11th at 0400, 2-5 advanced through the thick morning mist. They're supported by machine gun battalion again. Marine platoons were destroyed, just cut down by the German machine gun fire. But just wave after wave kept going. One battalion had advanced in the wrong direction, but they ended up stumbling into some Germans, and they smashed the southern German defensive line. On the 13th, the German counterattack begins. They're supported by artillery, and they almost capture a town on the east side of the woods. And again, there's heavy gas casualties. By the 23rd, the brigade launches a major offensive, but they're unable to gain ground. Again, staggering losses. It's reported that on the 23rd, it took 200 ambulances to carry the wounded. And just, to picture this, we're using bolt-action rifles, and we're going against the most experienced army in the world at the time, and the best troops of the most experienced army at that time. And they had way more machine guns than we did. By the 25th, Belleau Wood is subjected to a 14-hour bombardment by the French, and the U.S. forces were finally able to completely clear the forest. Then on the 26th, there was an early morning German counterattack, but before the end of the day, Major Maurice Scheer was able to say, Allies victory. Of the 9,500 Marines at Belleau Wood, there was over 1,000 KIA, 3,600 wounded, gassed, or missing, with a casualty rate of 49%. So the next time we talk about Belleau Wood, it wasn't just like a day, right? Because maybe it was only me, but I didn't know anything about Belleau Wood. But yeah, Belleau Wood, you have Belleau Wood. I didn't know anything about it. It was 26 days of hell, and our predecessors, it was a big deal. They left us quite the legacy. Aftermath of just Belleau Wood, and the war is just starting for us. It lasts from the 1st to the 26th of 1918. It was constant daily fighting. We got a lot of publicity out of it. That's where the Marine Corps propaganda machine started, right? We all talk the big talk, but fortunately we live up to it. At the end of the battle, the Marines gave the Army general, the commander of the brigade, Harvard, they gave him an Eagle Globe and Anchor out of respect. Another Army general would go on to say, the Marines didn't win the war here, but they saved the Allies from defeat. Had they arrived a few hours later, I think that would have been the beginning of the end. So it was significant. The woods were renamed. I'll just say it in English. In English, it is Wood of the Marine. France gave the brigade the Cross of War. I have it in French up there, but I'm just an uncultured kid from a south suburb of Chicago. I'm not going to try it. To this day, the 5th and 6th Marines wear the French fourragère. That's that rope on their left arm is pictured. So, first battle of the war. Brand new, right, to the theater. Well, they've been to the theater for a year, but first battle in Belleau Wood. All right, so that wraps up the 26th of June. July 15th, the brigade is involved at Soissons. The Germans are again doing a last push. Germany is drained of men and resources. A million reinforcements from the U.S. are arriving in western France. So the Germans are doing this push. So 2nd Division quickly, silently, confused, they make a secret night movement trying to cut off the Germans. It's a 2-day battle. It ends up halting the German attack. And for interesting history, the battle is led by French tanks. We have any tankers? Probably the first time the Marines moved behind tanks. So the brigade would suffer over 2,000 casualties on the 15th. Brigadier General John A. Lejeune, he would write and publish on July 26, 1918, I have this day assumed command of the 4th Brigade U.S. Marines. To command this brigade is the highest honor that could come to any man. Its renown is imperishable, and the skill, endurance, and valor of the officers and men have immortalized the name and that of the Marine Corps. So this was a big deal because we had the Army general. So now Pershing thinks enough of us to allow us to have our own commander. Also note, he has a 2nd Army Division patch on his shoulder. Isn't that interesting? You know, we don't see that today. August 5th. Oh, and by the way, on these maps, I keep Belleau Wood circled in blue. That's on the left. Just so we kind of have the relative where everything kind of falls. August 5th, the brigade moves to Pont-à-Mousson, where they get intensive training and preparation. They had a rather rough June and July. September 12th to 16th is the Saint-Mihiel offensive. It happens near the French town of Jolny. The brigade took over the entire sector's front line of advance. They were tasked with driving out the German outposts. On these days, we'll lose 132 KIA, 574 wounded. And in September, we moved by rail up to Sari. You can see it on the map there. October 4th and 5th, we're moved by bus and by foot, obviously with the 2nd Army Division. The 6th Marines would lead the attack with 5th Marines in support. Lejeune gets wind that, that's the debate. Somebody said Lejeune. Lejeune gets word that the French want to split up the Marine brigade into piecemeal to reinforce the French divisions. So he goes to the French commander and promises him, if you allow us to stay together and lead the attack, we'll win this for you. The battle lasts 2 days, actually a little bit longer than that. History actually says 7 days. In the 7 days, we have never heard of the Battle of Blanc-Mont Ridge. But in those 7 days, the Marines lost half as many men as Belleau Wood. What we lost in 26 days, we lost half of that in just 7 days in this battle. St. Etienne, on October 8th, we moved south of Nancy, which technically is further south than what the map has on it. South of Nancy, 1/6 is tasked with taking the town. They held it through a couple of counterattacks. The 5th Marine Brigade, made up of 11th Marines and 13th Marines, arrives in September and October, and they came out of Quantico. And then we push forward to the Meuse-Argonne line. This is kind of the end line where the war is going to end. And this is the same line that we see 20 years later with World War II, right? Deja vu all over again. Following a major artillery barrage, we attempt to get across the river. The Germans were on the other side of the river. This is the first battle that the Marines would use the Browning automatic weapons, automatic rifles, the bars, that become famous in World War II. This is the first battle we use them in. By the end of the day, we have 31 KIAs, 148 wounded. Lejeune will write to history that both sides had intensive artillery fire, and then everything fell silent at the armistice. So the armistice, we all know, 1,100 hours on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. The war ended. We celebrate Veterans Day on that day. Total world carnage was 9.7 military dead across all the combatants, and over 10 million civilian dead. It was just a horrible war, and we go on to repeat it 20 years later. The The peace isn't actually signed until middle of 1919, but in June of 1919, the Germans were pushing back at the peace conference, so the Marine Brigade actually moved to the east for 2 days during that time. And then the 4th and 5th Brigades, so that's made up of the 5th, 6th, 11th, and 13th Regiments. They'll stay in Europe until July of 1919 on security duty. History records a great controversy. We knew that peace was probably going to be called, on the 11th hour, 11th day, November 11th. But Pershing continued to attack. And one of the books I'm going to suggest at the end, I think it's called Through the Wheat. We'll have it here in a couple of slides. Kind of details the Marines that are dying on the last days. We asked for volunteers, Marines, to swim across the river as we're trying to get a beachhead across this river, and they're getting killed. But young Marines are still volunteering at the end. But the controversy is that Pershing kept pushing right up to the 11th hour because he didn't have good faith in the Germans. So he kept the pressure on. That could be the wrong thing. If you watch a UFC fight and a guy gets staggered, right? It's a big attack just to end it, right? So that they don't kind of get refreshed and come back. So you can kind of decide if Pershing was right or wrong to do that. I always like to finish these talks with the postscripts. I'm always fascinated with, so then what happened? What happened to Robert E. Lee after the Civil War? So Pershing will become the general of the Armies. We'll see that with Eisenhower during World War II in 1919. He becomes the Chief of Staff of the Army in 21. He will devise a national network of highways to be used by civilians and military to move across the country, which will look eerily like what the Eisenhower administration comes up with in the 50s. And he'll pass in 1948 at the age of 87. Our hero, Dan Daly, one of the big men in the Marine Corps, right? Come on, you sons of bitches, you want to live forever. His quote is on the National Museum of the Marine Corps, across the walls there. Big hero. He was actually a slight man. He was 5'6" and 132 pounds. He won the Medal of Honor twice before World War I. He'll retire in 1929. He'll be a bank guard in New York. He never marries, and he passes in 37 at just the age of 63. Marine aviation. Remember, we started with 5 officers, 18 enlisted. We'll end the war with 282 officers and 2180 men, almost 2,200 men. We couldn't bring our own planes, so we used British planes. We had 20 DH-9As and 16 DH-4s, they're pictured here. And we would strap bombs. That's how we were used. We did bombing runs. We'd strap bombs underneath the wings. But generally there was a senior sergeant in the back seat with a machine gun. That's still so cool, isn't it? Like bucket list stuff. If only I could be in a back seat of one of those, firing a machine gun. The Marine Corps would do 57 missions, and we'll drop 33,000 pounds of bombs. Floyd Gibbons, the one with all the colorful prose with the Chicago Tribune, he'll actually lose an eye in the Battle of Belleau Wood. Belleau Wood was such a bad battle that even the reporters were getting injured. He was planning on going to Europe to cover World War II, early World War II, when the conflict started in Europe. But he'll pass at the age of 39. He'll pass in 39 at the age of 52. The U.S. Navy, we can't forget our brothers. They're tasked with transport, right? We had a bunch of men and material to get to Europe. They had a significant role in fighting the U-boats. In fact, we talked about Geiger. He was one of the early Marine aviation officers. Geiger would routinely volunteer to go up in hot air balloons off the ship looking for the U-boats as they crossed. They laid a bunch of sea mines. Upon declaration of war, the Coast Guard became part of the Navy. On October 15th, 1917, the first sinking of a U-boat and a Medal of Honor to a sailor happens for the U.S. Navy. And the Navy had 21 Medals of Honor. The Marine Corps, 32,000 served in France, of which, and remember, the 5th Brigade got there in September of October, a month before it ended. Of the Marines, we had almost 2,500 killed in action and almost 9,000 casualties. Only 25 Marines were taken prisoner. There was 8 Medals of Honor. In 1919, Major Cunningham of the Air Wing would petition the Board of the Navy to use close air support. But we would not use close air support until Nicaragua in 1927. And then, of course, we get a bunch of significant Marines that come out of World War I, and they play huge roles in World War II, right? The famous author of Fixed Bayonets, and Grady has like an original edition with him that he's going to auction in the future. The author is John Thompson. John Thompson writes, "The Marine Brigade was unique because all its opportunities were conspicuous. It came upon the front at critical times. Great events hinged upon its attacks. Much of that was chance, but there was nothing of luck. There was cold, hard discipline and much war wisdom learned under the guns and sheer clean skill in fighting, which made the opportunities look good." So the battles that the Marines played a part in, again, we were just a small piece of the overall American Expeditionary Force, was a big deal. Belleau Wood, the first American battle monument was built in 1923. 1955, there was a monument built to the brigade. There have been 2 U.S. naval ships named the Belleau Wood. I served on one of them. It's obviously part of the lore, right? We all know Belleau Wood. And there's an annual memorial service that always gets televised on the news in June. Further reading, if you want to learn more about this, a guy named Alan Axelrod has a wonderful book out there called "The Miracle at Belleau Wood: The Birth of the Modern U.S. Marine Corps." That just focuses on the battle, and frankly, it's painful just to read just day after day. It was just horrific. Another great book about the whole World War I experience for the Marines is Through the Wheat, and that's by Brigadier General Edwin Simmons and Colonel Joseph Alexander. You know, you see Joseph Alexander on a lot of the history programs. Well-written, interesting book. And then YouTube, if you're a YouTuber, the best video I found, it's just on Belleau Wood, because nobody talks about the other battles we had in World War I. It's called Belleau Wood, the U.S. Marines' Bloodiest Conflict in World War I. It's a really good video. Thank you.